How many Jeopardy fans do we have here this morning? Raise your hand. Awesome, awesome. I just thought it would be kind of fun if we were to start our service this morning with a little game of Sunday morning Jeopardy. Okay? So let's look at the categories for today, can we? Okay? South Fork old timers. Okay? These are things that you may or may not know about the older demographic of our church. For instance, one of them used to babysit Abraham Lincoln. Okay? You can figure out which one that is. Second one is South Fork Church legends. These are things that are told about South Fork Church that may or may not be true, okay? But those are those legends that are out there. The third category is human anatomy, and that's just how well do we know the human body. Number 4 is South Fork Church elders, okay? These are things that you probably don't know about our elders that you should, okay? Lastly, South Fork Church history. Okay, these are actual events that took place during the 192-year history of our church. So which category should we begin with today? You're right, human anatomy for 100, okay? Good choice, okay? And here is the clue, okay? See if you know the answer. It has 27 bones, 27 joints, 34 muscles, and over 100 ligaments and tendons, numerous blood vessels, nerves, and soft tissue. In the form of a question, please. No. What is your hand? Yes, that is correct. Good job, Jan. You know, the human hand is truly amazing in so many ways. And it was mentioned that maybe that could be the foot. Did you realize that between our 2 hands and our 2 feet, they have over half of the bones that are in our entire body? Okay, just those 4 appendages have half of the bones in our body. And oftentimes we just take them for granted until they don't work like they're supposed to, or for some reason they become detached from our body. You know, the human hand plays so many roles in our daily lives, and there are some roles that we may not even have thought about before. Today, we're going to continue our look at the core values of South Fork Church. And I just want to briefly mention the 2 of the 5 that we've already looked at. The first one that we looked at was service. And there's a tagline that goes with each of them. They're not on the screen, but the tagline for service is to make a difference. And we talked about how we don't serve in order so that we can get recognition or that there be some reward. We just serve so that we can make a difference in someone else's life. Then last week we looked at trust. And the tagline there is via transparency and accountability. Every relationship is dependent upon trust. I don't care who you are. I don't care what the relationship is. Whether it's a church and its leaders and the church and the congregation, there has to be trust. And the best way to maintain that is through transparency and accountability. You know what? Those are 2 core values. I describe them as low-hanging fruit that we as elders could identify pretty easily. They've been around here for decades, okay? So those were really important, and they are really important if we're going to accomplish our vision statement as well as our mission statement. And really the core value that we're going to look at today is just as important. So now I want to ask my volunteers that I've had talked to ahead of time to just kind of stand. And what I'd like for everybody else to do in the congregation is please just hold out your hand with your palm up, okay? Just do it, okay? Don't be like the Apostle Peter when Jesus tried to wash his feet, okay? Just hold out your hand and accept the gift, okay, that we're going to give to you this morning, okay? I promise you it doesn't hurt, okay? It's not going to hurt you. And, once you get it, what I want you to do is just hold on to it, okay? So if we can get the people up here, Brenda, if you want to come up here and get them, that would be great. Okay, keep holding out that hand. She'll put it in there for you. Okay. Everybody got it now? Okay. You can look at it real quick. Okay, it's one little thin dime, isn't it? But what I want you to do is I want you to close your, actually I'm going to get mine out of my pocket here. And what I want us to do is I want us to put it in our hand, and I just want us to hold tightly to it, okay? Just close your hand around it and make sure that it's secure. Don't put it on the seat next to you. Don't put it in your pocket. Don't hand it to the person next to you. Just hold on to it until I tell you to let go of it, okay? And everybody got their dime? Everybody got their dime secure? Okay, great. As you've seen already today, our topic or our core value that we're going to look at is generosity. And we all know people who during their lives have expressed extreme generosity. But we're not going to talk about them today. What we're going to talk about and what we're going to focus on is our hand. You know, everyone's still holding onto your dime, right? You can tell so much about someone by looking at their hands. For instance, some hands are very rough and calloused. And when we see a rough and calloused hand, we think that person does a lot of hard work, outside work. Whether it's male or female, there are calluses on people's hands who work hard in the elements, maybe outdoor. Or maybe they play an instrument. Maybe they play guitar, and where they have the strings on the frets, or they're strumming, or they're picking, there are callus on their fingers because that's how they work. Now, for people who have blisters, what that tells you is that their hands aren't used. They're not familiar or used to the type of work that they're trying to do. So there are rough and calloused hands, and then there are smooth, soft, and manicured hands. Fingernails are evenly cut, perhaps they're even polished. And it doesn't mean that that person doesn't work. It just means that they work differently. Maybe they work in an office where they're typing, they're working on a computer, they're doing something like that. Their hands aren't rough and tough, but they're smooth and manicured. But if they do it long enough, what might happen is their fingers become curled because of carpal tunnel syndrome. And it's hard to straighten their hand because they've been working so hard at those computers. You know, if you look at a person's hands long enough, you can more than likely begin to tell certain things about them. You know, people who are always wringing their hands, they're always rubbing their hands together. That tells us something about them. It tells us that perhaps they're suffering from anxiety or they're nervous about something. Now, granted, sometimes it's extreme examples where that happens, but if you see somebody rubbing their hands or they're nervous about something, that's a way to tell just by looking at their hands. And it's easy to tell if you look at somebody who's angry because they always have a fist. Their hands are always in the form of a fist. And they're really not interested in hearing what you have to say, especially if you disagree with them. If you disagree with them, what they want to do is just punch you in the face with that fist. Hands made into a fist tell us a lot. You can tell a lot about a person just by looking at their hands. Still holding onto your dime, right? It's still secure. Nobody's dropped it, anything like that. Okay, you still got it in your hands. Here's what I want to do, is I want to try to connect this core value of generosity, okay, by looking at our hands. Don't let go of that dime. Keep holding onto it tightly as I share some statements with you that I want you to hear, but I want you to still be focused on the security of that dime in your hands. And the first statement that I want to make today is simply this: holding on to things of limited value is risky. Holding on to things of limited value is risky. Think for a moment about the value of what we are clutching in our hand this morning. Its value is 10 pennies. There used to be a time when you could go to a 5 and dime store, you could maybe buy a piece of candy or other items. Nowadays, what can you buy for a dime? Well, being the inquiring mind that I am, I went on Amazon to see what I could buy for a dime. Here it is. A decompression toy, bright colors, relieve stress, smooth edge, clear texture, dinosaur pinch toy. This little bitty plastic thing, you can buy it for a dime and it will take all of your stress away. And you can get it for a dime. What's in your hand, you could buy that toy with. But if you look at the cost of shipping, you got to have 30 more dimes in order to be able to get that to your house. Believe it or not, between 1930 and 1934, you could actually buy a gallon of gas for 10 cents a gallon. A couple of you I know remember that. A dime today is just not worth very much. But you realize everything that you own, everything that you possess could be turned into a stack of dimes. In the Bible, there are two words that are oftentimes used together, and they are the words store up. They're used to describe the deliberate act of saving something or just holding on to it. This time of year, farmers are in the field gathering their grain, and what they do is they store it up. They put it in bins or they take it to the elevator in hopes that maybe, just maybe, the price will go up a dime every now and then. When we store something up, we hold on to it because we think it has value. Jesus challenged that way of thinking in the Sermon on the Mount when he said that there are other things that we should store up. Look with me at Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 19. New Living Translation says it this way: don't store up treasures on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moth and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Seems to me what Jesus is saying here, that what we're holding on to here, whatever we're holding on to, becomes our treasure. And if we hold on things that are earthly long enough, we're going to lose them, or there's a chance of losing them. But there's something that's more valuable that we can enjoy in heaven. Think about it. Anything that we hold on to on this earth that has, sometimes bugs can eat it. Other times natural forces, Jesus mentions rust, can destroy those things. And if something that we're holding on to has value that someone else perceives, they want that. So what will they do? They will come and steal from us what we are holding on to. So there's always risk involved when we're holding on to something here on earth, even if it's this little dime. This little dime in centuries will just disappear. Jesus said that generosity, the picture of generosity that we're going to see today, really helps us store up more valuable things that are in heaven. So that's the first thing that I want you to remember. The second thing is this: holding on to anything limits our ability to fulfill the second great commandment. Now, if you're trying to write in your message notes and you're having trouble doing that because you put the dime in the wrong hand, I will give you permission to switch to the other hand now, okay? Just because I'm a nice guy, okay? But switch that hand and continue to hold on to it, make it secure. You can make those notes, whatever you want to do. The second one is holding on to anything limits our ability to fulfill the second great commandment. When we hold on to something, doing other things become more difficult. Maybe not impossible, but definitely more difficult. I had a chance this week to spend some time with some people, and I was thinking about this illustration for the sermon, and I just asked them to hold on to a dime and to do different tasks. We were eating a lunch one day, and I said, hey, hold on to this dime while you're eating a lunch, and they did it. I said, here, pour me a drink, and they tried to do it. And then I said, go to the bathroom with that dime in your hand. And they just looked at me and said, no, not going to do it. I let them off on that one. But let me continue my experiment this morning with how difficult sometimes it becomes when we're holding on to things in our life by asking you to take one of the Bibles that's there in front of you. And I'd like for you to take that Bible. Everybody get his Bible as quickly as you can. Just reach over pews, whatever you got to do. And turn to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22, beginning in verse 34. Okay? Keep holding that dime. Don't let it drop. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." We are commanded by Jesus to love our neighbors. But what does that look like? Okay, quickly turn with me to Matthew chapter 5, verse 42, okay? Keep that dime in your hand. Matthew chapter 5, verse 42. "Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." And now turn forward to Matthew chapter 19. Where we read about a man who came to Jesus and asked him, "What good deed must I do in order to go to heaven?" And Jesus tells him, "Well, keep the commandments." Not the ones he just mentioned. This is a different story. "Keep the Old Testament commandments." And he lists a few of them. And the man says to him this, Matthew chapter 19, verse 20. Hold on that dime. "All these I have kept. What do I still lack?" And Jesus said to him, "If you would be perfect," that word means complete or whole. "If everything were the way it's supposed to be in your life, sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Seems as though this man wanted to hold on to what he had instead of following Jesus. Jesus challenged him to give what he was holding on to those who were in need. There are numerous times in the Old Testament where the Israelites were commanded to give to the poor. There are suggestions, there are encouragements, there are all kinds of stuff in the New Testament where we are told to love our neighbor by helping to meet their need. It's hard to love your neighbor. It's hard to meet their needs if we keep holding on to this possession that we have in our hands. Now, is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. You can figure out a way that you can do it, but it's harder when we're holding on to something and trying to help those who are in need. Third statement that I want you to consider this morning is this: holding on to things hinders God's generosity in our lives. Holding on to things hinders God's generosity in our lives. Here's where I want you to use your imagination for a little bit, if you would. Hold out your hand, the one that's holding the dime, and hold it up with your palm up there. Keep those fingers wrapped around it very firmly so that it's not going to go anyplace. And here's where I want you to use your imagination. Imagine that I'm going to drop $100 bills into your hand, and you can keep all of them that you can catch. That's the imagination part. It ain't going to happen, okay? But just imagine I were going to drop $100 bills over your hand, and you could keep all of them that you could catch with that hand. How many could you catch? Not many. You might be able to squeeze one or two in, but you're not going to get very many of them. We can't receive when we're holding tightly to something else. The fact that God is generous is unquestionable. Every moment of every day, God is trying to give us something. if we're willing to receive it. How do I know that? Keep that dime in your hand and turn to Luke chapter 6 with me this morning. This is Luke's version of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It's what Matthew put in Matthew 5, 6, and 7 of his gospel. It's chapter 6 in Luke. And in the beginning of verse 37 of chapter 6 of Luke, he's talking about how we should be generous when it comes to judging other people. But then in verse 38, there is this statement by Jesus that has become the foundational principle for generosity throughout the entire Bible. It can really be applied to every part of our lives. It can be applied to how we judge other people. It talks about how we handle our money or how we treat other people in general. It's about being generous. It's about being generous so that God can be generous with us. Look at Luke chapter 6, verse 38. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. What Jesus does in this illustration that he gives, or this statement that he gives, is he refers to something that would have been a lot clearer to people back in the first century when he said it than it is to us today. Because it talks about how when someone would sell grain to someone, he would take a measuring container and he would pour grain into it until it was about 3/4 full. And then he would shake that container to make sure that the grain was level and that he could get into that container as much as possible. The goal was to get as much as possible into this container that this person was buying, also guaranteeing that they were getting everything that they were paying for. I used to watch my mom as a child as she was baking, and I remember her as she was using flour, she would get out a measuring cup and she would pour flour into it and then she would tap it on the counter. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she said, I'm going to get the air out. So I make sure that I get the right amount of flour that the recipe calls for. What Jesus said was, when we give up what we're holding on to, God can not only pour more of what we're holding on to in our hand, but he continues to pour into the point where it goes into our lap. And it overflows from there as well. But in order for that to happen, the first word that Jesus said was, give. Give. And God will pour into your life. Now, there have been people for a very long time who have distorted and warped this message of Jesus to say that, you know what, the reason we should give is so that we can get from God. It's called the prosperity gospel. You know, the thing about the prosperity gospel is the only people who prosper from it are the people who teach it. Because all they do is they go in to take advantage of people who have very little and want them to give what they have to them. True generosity is never about what we get, but it's about helping and loving other people. I want you to go ahead and open up your hand now if you can, after squeezing for so long. I want you to take a look at your hand. It's different, isn't it? I don't know about yours, but mine even feels better when it's extended like this than when it's bundled or clenched like that. You know, when we let go of whatever it is that we're holding on to, it eliminates the risk. It allows us to love others and for God to pour into our lives. When we held this piece of money in our hands, or while we held this piece of money in our hands, I've been talking about generosity. But generosity goes far beyond just money. Luke chapter 6, verse 38 is a universal law of our lives, but I find it interesting that when Jesus talked about generosity, guess what he talked about? He talked about money. He didn't talk about time and talents. He talked about how we handle or deal with our money. Typically today, people like to deflect this conversation away from money and to talk about other things like time and treasures and talents and those types of things. I've done that when I'm not comfortable with the level of financial generosity that I'm doing in my life. See, it's easier to say, well, I'll just give some more time, but I'm going to hold on to my money. You know, the core value statement that we have here at South Fork reads like this: generosity, graciously offering what God has given to us. We know that the Bible teaches this very fundamental thing of stewardship, and that is that every single thing that we have has been given to us by God. And in reality, it's still His. So what we're holding on to when we hold on to anything, whatever it is, whether it be our time, whether it be any relationship, whether it be money, when we hold on to that, what we're doing is we're holding on to God's possession. And we have to ask ourselves, is this how God wants me to use what He's given me? Or does He want to use it to love someone? To help someone? At South Fork, we will never manipulate people, whether by guilt or any other means, to exercise generosity. And you know what? The good news is, as leaders, we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to do those things because generosity has been a part of this congregation for such a long time that it was another one of those fruits that we could just say, you know what? This is a core value that has been a part of South Fork for a long time. We don't have to invent it. We don't have to create it. Its spirit is already here. In this church, when there's someone that we know of who has a need, we try our best to do whatever we can to meet that need. Sometimes we open up our hands financially and we give to people who are in need of financial help. Other times it's ways that we can serve them, where we come beside them, just showing them that we love them. For our church to be this loving community that our vision state calls us to be, we must continue to honor this value of generosity. And you know what? I know we will, because I know this congregation. Now, there will be people from time to time who may not have reached the point in their life where they can walk around with their hands open. There are times when they want to hold on to certain things. But you know what? Watching other people who are generous and who have extreme generosity in their lives is inspirational. At least it is to me, if I let it be. What I know is this: if we want to be Christ-like, we've got to live with our hands open, just like His hands were when they were nailed on a cross. So may the picture of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ hanging on the cross with His hands open wide be the picture that we think of when we think of generosity.